in some ways the reactions along the same tribal lines we always talk about. Are we focused on the right things?
Well, this is certainly a challenge to our democratic process. And I find it frightening that people have already made their decisions without knowing the full story, without reading why the decision was made, without understanding the ramifications of that decision, and looking at the consequences, not just for that one state and that one decision, but for American politics and elections for the long term. I've talked to my colleagues in the polling profession who've been in the field since that decision was made 48 hours ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell me that it hasn't changed the numbers, but it absolutely has changed intensity. Whereas you had 70% of Trump voters that were absolutely determined to vote for him, that 70% is now up into the mid 80s. And those who are going to vote against him, their intensity has grown as well. Fewer undecided voters, fewer people that are going to listen to the arguments, and more people that have made up their minds and don't have any desire to hear an alternative point of view. And that, to me, as an academic, as a professor, that's frightening. For in the end, elections absolutely matter, but American democracy and our future matters even more.
It's almost an existential challenge because in the courts, of course, they're trying to do what they feel is legally appropriate, citing Article 3, the 14th Amendment, a lot of debate about that and what the Supreme Court will do. How much, we could have anticipated this. We've talked in the past about the fact that every time there is a decision against Trump, it reinforces this idea of him being a victim, of there being a deep state against him. So perhaps we're not surprised by the outcome. Should it have been approached differently? Should it have been avoided in the first place?
You can't avoid, if something's wrong, and I'm not passing judgment on this decision, but if something's wrong, you can't avoid it, even if it causes discomfort. And in this case, it could cause chaos. In fact, I can see a situation where the Supreme Court reviews this and precipitates even something close to a constitutional crisis, because this is redefining the electoral process so close to and it'll be redefining it as the election is going on. And that's going to add passion. It's going to add division to whatever happens. And so I am concerned about that. But the fact is there are other states that looked at this and said no, that it is not justified. You've got judges and legal scholars on both sides of the aisle that have a problem with this decision. And what we don't need right now is more chaos in our political system. What we really need is clarity. And this is not going to add to the clarity in any sense of the word.
Before we move on, can I go back to the first principles of, given the intention of Article 3, obviously it was forged, just a few years after the Civil War, so that context I think is important. This is a unique case in which it can be deployed. So in what way does it actually change the electoral process? Is it court interference with primaries, elections? Is that the way in which we should be concerned?
Shouldn't voters decide who they're voting for? Do we really want courts to make that decision? Do we really want courts to play that game, to take people out of politics, out of the ballot process? I'm not sure about that. I do know that things have changed since Article 3 and since the 14th Amendment was ratified. Obviously, there are strict constructionists who believe in the original intent, and that matters as well. I just think that you're throwing in a really dangerous wrinkle right now that does benefit Donald Trump in the short run, that creates a level of distrust towards our electoral process, which is really damaging in the long run. And how the Supreme Court handles this, their decision making, the context that they use to explain their point of view is truthfully, significantly more important than anything that they've done since overturning Roe v. Wade, because all of America is going to be watching. and all of America is going to be responding, whatever they decide to do.